there's a lot of things the world, I hope, is about to find out about you. What I do know and what is easy to tell about someone for me, because I'll just call it a gift. I don't know what it is. I can see from the jump whether someone has a sincere presence about them, whether or not they're giving me themselves or they're projecting. And I think some of us in all at all kind of walks in life and shakes in life project something because we've got some insecurities built in. But there are people who are genuine about the good that they are putting out in the world. And then there are people who are just trying to make you think that they are putting good out into the world. And I count you as one of those people who are genuinely putting good out into the world. That was easy to see from the jump. And so I'm really excited to hear your story today. Wherever it is that takes us is certainly and mostly dependent on you. Mark and I like to ask questions and probe a little bit. But for the most part, we'll go where you take us. And thank you for joining us. So
Absolutely.
tell us your name.
Well,
Tell us a
thank
little
you.
bit about you.
Thanks,
And
Jess.
give
What an
us an
intro.
intro.
Geesh, I don't know. Well, I can tell you, I can appreciate the seat that you're sitting in because usually I'm doing the interviewing.
Yep.
So I know
Yep.
that, producing this content takes work and time and effort. And, I appreciate that in terms of you guys putting out things like this and learning about people. So yeah, it's like luck is almost, it's everywhere around us. You have good and bad luck. I would say that for me, I mean, I'd like to think I've had a lot more good luck than bad luck, but Jess, as you know, in our conversations over the past year or so, sometimes you do get unlucky with things and you got to kind of just, I guess, persevere through and push through and talk to people. That was one thing that I think I really benefited from as I was kind of transitioning. And I'll tell you more about that, but just talking to people like you, Jess, and my contacts. And that was one of the things, by the way, that I think the podcast, which I co-host the podcast with my actually two other people, Jack Forehand and Matt Ziegler, but just the natural networking. I was never a great networker because I've worked from home for like 20 years and I just, was just head down sort of running the businesses that I was previously involved in. But sort of through the podcast, which we've been doing for, I don't know, 4.5, 5 years, it created like this natural, great network of peers. And actually, many of those people have now turned into friends. And so I think you guys will see and are seeing probably the benefits of that for you, which is great. Because again, I'm not, naturally great at getting out there and like, let's do lunch or let me come down to the city or, you know what I mean? So, and COVID kind of changed that too, I think a little bit with things. So it's like, where do you want me to, I was thinking about this conversation and like, it's like, I was thinking about like what is it? Chunk and Goonies when they get him, the gangsters and they're like, so tell us everything. And he's like, in third grade, I spit in the whatever, he starts like way back. So
all
I
the
don't
things
know.
on his conscience.
Yeah.
Well, if you're Steve Martin and you were born a poor black child, we can start there. But Justin, we the way I've like to put it is, we'd like to hear your story, however you want to tell it, and from whatever significant liftoff point, or whether you want to work backwards from where you are today, or whether there was some event that was like, this was important to me and triggered how I move forward, or however you want to do it. I mean,
cool. Yeah.
This is your time to tell us what you think is important to you.
Yeah. So I guess, I'm from Vermont originally. I ended up coming down to Connecticut. I went to UConn. I ended up running track for UConn for a few years and met my bet.
This is a question. This is a question from Perth. What's your fastest? Is it 400?
Fastest 400 time is, well,
is that right?
Yeah, 400 or that would be probably.
What was your main event?
In high school was the 2 and the 400. And then in college, I wasn't fast enough. So I did the 6 and the
fastest mile. That was your question.
Oh, fastest mile. I think like low fives, something like that, like 5:20. I still
Not bad for a
run.
middle distance. Not bad
That's
for a middle
awesome.
distance guy.
Yeah. You runner, Mark? Do you know?
I used to be. I don't have any more medial meniscus. I need a medial compartment
Oh,
replacement. But
geez. Yeah.
I was a 10K. I mean, I would normally do 10K a
Nice.
day, kind of.
Yeah.
And I was about was a 48-minute 10K guy, 50 minutes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now I
Solid.
stick to the bicycle, and my
Yep.
average speed's about 18, 19 miles an hour.
Well, still getting after it.
I like to go fast, whether it's in cars or bicycles or when I was running.
That's awesome.
Not
Okay,
a
so you were a
distance
track guy.
speed guy.
So yeah, track. And then so sort of my start, so I met my best friend at UConn. We were roommates since day one. And after my sophomore year at UConn, and this was my best friend's harebrained idea. I was just kind of going along with it because I was like, we're best friends. Like I was very, I guess, able to be influenced because this was a big deal. He's like, let's join the Connecticut Air National Guard and go to the Guard, and then we'll get our tuition paid for and get the GI Bill. And I was like, I wasn't getting any scholarship money from UConn, and I was paying out of state tuition. My parents were, so they really couldn't continue to afford that. So for me, it was like, so I actually ended up sort of quitting the track team at the end of my sophomore year, and then we went up to, when you join the military, you go up to this thing called like MEPS, which is up in Springfield, Massachusetts. And it's like these physical tests they put you through and they ask questions. And so, we're getting all these physical tests done, and I'm in this room with my buddy. And then they're like, has anyone ever had kidney stones? Well, he raises his hand that he's had kidney stones. He gets kicked out. Next thing I know, I find myself, I'm going to basic training at like Lackland Air Force Base by myself because here I am, basically joining. So anyways, that was kind of funny, but it kind of put me on, yeah. And the crazy thing about that is, so I was this like Division I athlete going into basic training, and we actually had a female TA, which is a like training instructor, and she was pretty hardcore, but she was like very fit. And so I was like, and she was actually this was her last like basic training squad to go through. Then she was moving on to something else. And because I was this like elite runner, she like was like, she loved me. She was just like, I could do no wrong. I actually, there was a road race at Lackland Air Force Base, and she actually let us do it. And like, I won this big trophy, and then I had to like get it shipped home. And it's like, it's not, basic training is difficult, but the Air Force is not what the other ones are. But anyway, so that's just a side thing for me. But yeah, anyways, and then I took because I was from out of state from Vermont, I took a year off, established my residency in Connecticut, and then went back to school, and had the Guard basically pay my tuition. And that was undergrad. I met my wife at UConn, but at UConn, and this is where I got my start in finance. I guess at such a young age. I think so it was like at the end of my junior year, my best friend and roommate, there was like this flyer in the career center that was like stock market research analyst wanted. And so again, my best friend went down, he applied for this like internship. And then after he got it, he pulled me in. And this was the start of my career at Validia. Now, then this is back in the late 90s. So what we were doing at that point in time, there was a gentleman who I was partners with, and still am loosely involved with some things on the research side of things, but his name is John Reese, and he was funding this company where we were researching stock market recommendations, and we were writing those up. And it was basically like a startup internet company, like a startup finance.com internet company. And there was a bunch of college kids that were interns that were working for him doing this like research. And there was other things being developed as well. And then ultimately, like I started there my junior year, and we ended up raising $5 million in venture capital funding. And I actually managed, after I graduated college, I had 6 full-time. So I was like 21 years old. I had 6 full-time people under me and about 30 different interns that were doing this research on compiling recommendations in the stock market and tracking the performance of those. So that was like kind of this, not fintech, but like research company that had raised all this venture capital money. Then basically the bear market came in 2000 and funding dried up for all of our businesses because there was no path to profitability here. And we had to like dismantle the company. And so, in the first like 2 to 3 years of my professional career, I was involved in like growing a business substantially and then actually having to dismantle it. And the one thing I remember about that was kind of tough was, and this is, I think it's important, at least for me and what I've learned, like we were like letting people go. It was just a really painful thing because like every 3 months we were like reducing, 3 people here and like 4 people here. And so it was this like slow burn down. And it's like always like cutting off like one finger at a time. We would have been better off just biting the bullet and not having, because culturally it just didn't, at the end there, it was kind of painful.
It's very demoralizing when you have to do that. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And so then I went back to grad school. I went back to UConn. I got a graduate assistantship, so my tuition was paid for. I went back to UConn, the full-time program. And during my time there, the founder of Validia and the guy that I do the podcast with, Jack Forehand, they said, let's take the intellectual property that we have and let's turn this into a subscription-based business. So this is in 03 timeframe. And we kind of, I guess, I'm not sure if I approached them or they approached me, but I had contacts in the media that were sort of influential writers at the time. And I was able to get some really good like media exposure for the research business at that time, which ended up being quite significant in terms of like launching that business. So, there used to be a time where you get an article in the Wall Street Journal or on MSN Money or on CBS Market Watch, and it would actually like move the needle considerably in terms of like driving subscriptions. Those days are gone, but back in 03, especially for what we were doing, it was kind of big. So I ended up becoming like a business development consultant to the research company. And then in 2005, we launched the RIA. So we launched Validia Capital. And then for basically like 20 years, I had like one foot in this research business and then another foot in building a registered investment advisory firm. And we basically were running systematic models that were inspired by great investors, if I could kind of sum up. So taking the strategies of like Warren Buffett and Peter Lynch and Benjamin Graham and running those, building models based on those great investors, and then building like active factor-based portfolios. And Validia Capital it was a great business for most of that time. And the one thing I was just going to say here, and then I'll kind of stop if I'm going on and on, but like, I really, for the vast majority of my time there, it's like I felt very fortunate. I really enjoyed my job. Things sort of changed at the end with the underlying business. It wasn't anything to do with like disagreements among the partners or anything. It's just the trajectory of that business was changing. And that's when I had decided, and I'm kind of fast forwarding. There's a lot that happened in between 2005 and, the end of 2023, but I sort of made a transition to another asset manager, doing some consulting work for them, thinking that might be a little bit more of a permanent thing. That didn't work out. And then ultimately, through a set of good luck and conversations with people and, Perth seeing value in my skill set. And I think like people that might not know, Perth is the founder of Life and Liberty Indexes. I mean, if they've watched your show, they know who Perth is, but she runs she's developed a index that weights emerging market countries based on their freedom, and then sort of allocates to those countries versus your typical passive emerging market index at my market cap weight. That would have things like China or other countries where freedom isn't as high. Purse index is very different. It's a first freedom weighted index, and it's been very successful within inside an ETF wrapper. And Perth and I had gotten to know each other through Wes Gray, Jess, I had done for a couple of years. I had done March for the Fallen with Wes and the crew, and that's where I first met Perth. And then, and I just feel really lucky that I feel like my experience in like building those businesses, in terms of like what Perth and our company now needs, is going to be really good, because the job's going to be really diverse and exciting. And I've done a lot in my career, and that was kind of one thing I was struggling with a little bit. When you do like a lot of things, you're not like a specialist really. So yeah.
All right, I have a couple of things to reflect back to you, and then a question. So the thing that stands out to me about your career path is that there's probably more, but two main kind of personalities, two main kind of interests that would pull me through a career like that. Which is, one, I really like analyzing research, and the other is I really like building something meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a combination of both for you, or is it one or the other that has kind of
it's a little more
pull the string through?
I think it's a little more building, because with building, you're still doing that. Like I've built a lot of things, like, building a blog with content on it, managing freelance writers, or educating investors on different investment strategies, building presentations and webinars, building the podcast, building an RIA, building our compliance program, so it's like, I think the building is more where I sort of get like the excitement, the fire is there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of probably is largely influenced from like the very first job I had, which is like the building of the research business. And,
Mm-hmm.
how often does and maybe out in Silicon Valley, it happens more, or maybe, it just depends on your path in life, but it's my very first real job in the real world was building a internet-based company and managing it, a couple dozen people. And I think once you have that taste, it's hard to not want to do that,
Yeah, no. And I appreciate you answering that question. It has never ceased to amaze me how many different paths people have taken through finance. Mark pointed out in a conversation we had recently that I'm a connector, and I know that I am. That is something that I find a tremendous amount of joy seeing those things. The idea or the thing in my mind that goes, oh, this person needs to talk to this person. Got it. Cool. Let's make that connection. I love seeing that come together. And it's part of one of the reasons why I love this podcast. It's part of one of the reasons why I love the side of the personal finance side of the business. And it's also why I dabble on the institutional side, because I just like connecting. I just like knowing people and knowing the connections between people. And if you would have asked me graduating from college, I probably at some point along those next 10 to 12 years could have figured out that, yes, I am a connector. I would have never told you that I thought I could do that inside finance. Like, never. It would have just never occurred to me that that was a career lane, as it were, and something that could pull me through some different opportunities in finance. And yet here we are. And so building is also something that I think people may or may not directly associate with a finance job. Yet here you are. And so I just think it's one of the things I enjoy doing with this podcast, as we talk about like, how did we get here, is, and as Mark points out, like if it just inspires one person to see your story, hear your story, and think, okay, well, maybe that's a direction I could head to. Maybe that's something that could be a good fit for me too. I do like building. I do like,
Mhm.
um, creating things and solving problems and helping people figure out like how to get to the next level. Like that is a legitimate career path here in finance, and probably in any other in many other areas of of the working world. But I just love kind of calling those things out so that people can say, hey, it's not just about equations. It's not just about, you have to really understand quant topics. You have to be able to manage portfolios. It there's just a lot more here. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So true.
And I would just throw into that a little bit. I mean, you've done a couple of different, had a couple different roles in startup and growth, and it's that's a tough skill set,
Mm-hmm.
which is why there are so few CEOs who survive the growth period to create a large company, right? The Bill
That's
Gateses of the
true.
world, the Bill Gateses of the world are actually very rare.
Yeah.
Who were there from startup and then are now the CEO of this major enterprise, because I think it sounds like, this is a question, what you really enjoy and this connection now with Perth is because you get to create all this stuff and start it and build it from scratch. And then once it all gets to operations, it's maybe not so interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think on that, like, yes, but I mean, Perth has built a lot of, the ETF has been around for 5 years and the index
Right.
even
Yeah.
longer. So it's like a very strong foundation is there, but there's still a lot of things to be built on that, including some
Mhm.
operational things, some marketing related things. This is what's great. It's like
Well, it's,
with
it's one
Perth.
thing when you have $500 million worth of assets. It's another thing when you have several billion.
Yeah, well, yeah, and
It's just a
but
different problem.
well, yeah, but it's so yeah, it's going to be a lot of diversity in the job,
Yeah,
which is
which
going to
is
be
very
great.
cool. It's perfect. Yeah, yeah. All these things that these skills that you've just been acquiring along the way are all dumping into this one bucket that you can pull from and use
And just to
in this
back up,
role.
what is your degree, Justin?
So my undergrad was in economics,
Okay.
and that was I thought I wanted to do like psychology, and then I was like, oh no, maybe I'll do economics, and that was fine. I still and then when I
Oh,
went back to
Richard
business.
Thaler would tell you that economics is psychology, but that's a
Well,
whole.
yeah, that's good. True. Yeah, I think you're right. And which I love the behavioral finance sort
Yeah.
of stuff. I mean, that all really came during, I think, like my career. It really kind of came to the surface with Dollar and like the other, guys that are
Yeah.
talking about this important stuff. And then for my MBA, it was like strategic or marketing with like a minor in finance or something like that. Um,
Perfect.
With a little sidetrack into the National Guard, and your friend just ditched you, but okay. Nice. You do appear, just as an observation, to be very comfortable taking career risk, or some form of risk. I mean, you just kind of jump. The National Guard thing had to be a gut decision.
yeah, well, I kind of felt like it was, and at the same time, it was like I kind of knew. I mean, like my parents couldn't afford it anymore, and I didn't want to have
Mm,
tons of student loan debt, so it was like that was a good option for me um, at
yeah.
at the time.
And then, were you an economics major when you decided to go do the internship or the equity research?
Yes,
So
yeah.
you were already there
Well,
in
and
finance.
one thing that I skipped like a couple other just in between. Well, after the guard and in between when I started the internship, I kind of left out a summer. And there was a summer there where my best friend and I, again, this guy keeps on coming up. Maybe he should come on the podcast and he can tell you.
Is he in the room with us now?
No, but he'll like that I'm mentioning him because he. So like, but we got internships in New York City at a firm called Sands Brothers. And basically, so we got on like, I'm not kidding. Like his mom drove us to the bus station. We got on a bus. We had nowhere to live. We went to a YMCA. We were like living in like, I think it's considered like a hostel or whatever for like a week or two. And I put it on my credit card. I remember that because at that time I didn't really have any money, and I'm putting this thing on my credit card. And then like, we ended up, this brokerage firm was like, it was like Boiler Room. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It was like people making phone calls off of mortgage cards and trying to get like people on the phone. And if you get someone on the phone, you put them on hold, you hand them to like a senior sales guy. And it was like, and there was probably hundreds of like the people. And there was like it was right in Midtown. And we were interns there for that summer. And I made like, I don't even know what it was, very little, but and then what happened is one of the not head guys, but one of the more successful brokers had an apartment in Queens. And my buddy and I ended up, once the hostel thing was done, we ended up living like on his living room floor for like a summer. Like that's where we slept on these like mattresses and stuff. And we would go and, and that was like one of the things I just remember, like, it's so that like New York City's awesome, but it was just so tough. I was like walking to and this sounds so ridiculous. It sounds so petty, but like I was walking to like the train station, it'd be like 90 degrees. I'd be like sweating, like, getting into the office, and just, it was horrible. I was like, I kind of realized real quickly I didn't want to do that.
Okay, but side venture.
Yeah.
I just visited New York City with my daughter a few weeks ago, and there is something about New York City that you mentioned. It's tough, right? Like it is a hard city.
Yeah.
And people just accept that about New York City. Like it was not, from what I can tell in your story, it was not you were not doing things wrong by living on somebody's living room floor, sleeping on somebody's living floor. That was how you do New York City. Like that was just how you were going to make it in the city. And there is something about that city that people just embrace. This is tough, and we move on. Like it was even, I had this casual, it just stuck out to me because I'm from the South and it was just so different. But I'm walking down the street side by side with my daughter, because she's my daughter, and I'm not going to like walk in front of her, like I'm standing there with her. And this guy brushes past me and he goes, "Just take up the whole sidewalk, why don't you?"
Yeah.
And he just keeps moving. But that was just his way of dealing with the friction of the moment. But I guarantee you 10 steps later, he didn't even remember that comment. In Georgia, it's like if somebody takes too long to take off at a red light, not only are you going to hear honks, but that person is going to drive beside you. They're going to look you in the eye while they're driving beside you in the next lane. They're going to like let you know that you inconvenience. They're going to follow you around to let you know that you inconvenienced them. Whereas in New York City, it's just like, this moment was tough. You need to know how I feel. Now we're moving on. And it's just such a different, like it is a different city, and in kind of inspiring you out of your comfort zone in a lot of ways. I enjoy that about it. And I don't know if I don't know how many New York experiences you've had, but that sounds like it aligns with the few that I've had while being there.
Well, I think so. And, I don't get into the city maybe a couple of times a year now, and I'm kind of in and out. It's like, but I do agree. It's like a callous type of like mindset there, just because it's so hustle and bustle and so many people and so intense. And yeah, you just feel it. Like you step off you get into Grand Central and you step off the train, and it's like you're with this like wave of people, and everyone's just like marching, and you're just like, we're here now, let's go. I mean,
the subways smell terrible, but people of all kinds are in the subways. Like it's just we just accept this. This is just.
But I
happening.
appreciated that
Yeah.
that guy did that. And I remember too, the other crazy thing with that is like this broker's roommate. So if you're following me on the story, the broker that let us sleep in his living room, he actually had a roommate, and this guy was like smuggling cigars from Cuba like into New York. It was like he had this whole racket going on. So it's just like, I mean, yeah, again, to your point, it's like, kind of a legal trade going on here. And we were just like, not maybe that summer I might have gotten to cigars a little. I don't know. I kind of forget, but
well, if he was getting Cubans and the good hand rolled Dominicans in, that would be enticing.
Yeah.
One of the best things about going to Dominican Republic over all these years is, and they're not illegal anymore, but you could get Cubans there.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We used to do a golf trip, a group of guys, and we went to Dominican Republic every year, and you could get Dominicans, you could get Cubans there. Cause I mean, that's right across the water and not illegal. And they did a lot of trade.
I wonder, it seems like cigars have fallen off in terms of popularity, but maybe I'm just not in the,
No. I think that's accurate. I mean, I haven't smoked in a long time, but I think that is accurate. I mean, the prevalence of throat and mouth cancer tends to dampen.
Yeah. Right.
Those kinds of activities. We still have this 18-year gap that we have yet to cover between 2005 and 2023. So I'm going to press you a little bit to go there, unless you're like, nah,
sure.
I don't want to talk about that.
No. Yeah. So, I mean, that was kind of the bulk of so, I mean, basically I would say that was a time that was spent really growing the RIA. So when we started Validia Capital, we basically started with 0 in assets. By 2007, we had 100 million in assets under management. I was basically responsible for onboarding and talking to either hundreds or maybe probably thousands of different investors throughout this entire period.
You started the RIA
05
to 07.
And that was kind of like that was sort of like, and the reason we were growing so rapidly is because our types of strategies coming off of sort of that between that 03 and 07 period were like, double or triple the performance of the market, because we were basically like small cap value. And it was a great time to be in that style of investing. And what we were doing in terms of like quantitative, but these guru strategies was unique. It had a hook. And we were performing very well and we were growing very rapidly. So, and then talking about luck, going back to how you started the podcast, Jess, in 2007, we were contacted by a product development individual who worked for a very large bank in Canada. So he had read my partners that I've mentioned have published 2 books, but he had read one of our books and they wanted to develop a series of mutual funds based on our investing system. So the Canadians, and just a quick funny story on this one. So we've never had an office, and that was always something prior to COVID. It was always something that I was always like, oh crap, if like we get like a big investor says, where's your office? And it kind of did come back to bite us. And I can kind of get there. But like when the Canadians came down, when like the bigwig management guys came down, we actually like John Reese went to Harvard Business School. So he had membership at the Harvard Club in New York. So we were able to meet them at the Harvard Club, and that kind of was cool. So that's a great place to meet. And they ended up launching a series of those mutual. So, and then the financial crisis hit, which we got crushed. I mean, we went from like 100
value got destroyed.
Yeah. And we went from like, in terms of we went from like 100 million to like 30 million, but it wasn't all like market declines. There was obviously redemptions in there as well.
Right.
And
well, even just the market decline would have hit you 54 to
exactly
56, 58%.
Yeah. And I mean, we had clients that sold at the bottom, and I don't even know. And they're probably still not, it took some investors that I had kept in touch with, like even in by 2012 or 2013, they still weren't back in. Yeah. That was so traumatic. many investors. And we sort of,
Right.
as a business, learned a lot too. Like we kind of started to diversify the model lineup at that point and try to do some lower risk stuff. But what kind of saved us was the Canadians launched those funds in 2007, and we had a 10-year run sub-advising funds in Canada, and we peaked at like $1 billion in Canadian dollars in terms of assets in those funds. And so that, after the financial crisis, and still even to today, I mean, like value, the style, like traditional systematic value still hasn't, done really that well. And throughout that whole decade, like we were trying to deal with this struggle of like our strategies. And so that was a tough period for us because we kind of weren't growing. We would get like some new investors, but the Canadian business ended up being like a huge piece of business for us. And then what happened was, and this is the tough thing with institutional investment mandates for like a small manager. So we had built all these good relationships with the current due diligence team at the bank and like the product managers. And we were going up to Canada and doing road shows and blah, blah, blah. And then like they brought in like a new head guy to head up. And he basically like brought in all his people. And then they're like, we want to rationalize our fund lineup. And they started like doing like due diligence. Our performance wasn't that great either, but they started like doing due diligence, and they sent like a due diligence guy down, and he came like to Jack's house, and we were running like the servers in the basement, so we were still like in this like virtual mode and yeah, so we ended up losing the mandate. They replaced us with Goldman Sachs. So it's not like they replaced us with some shoddy, like, but it was that ended up being a bit, and that was in 2017. So that was, that was about, and then we decided in end of 2014 to put our own capital behind our own ETF. So we kind of saw guys like Med Faber and Wes and some other people that we really admired having success in raising capital with ETFs. So we, and to start an ETF then, it was more expensive and maybe a little bit more costly, but we put our own money behind it. And again, we launched, I always like to tell this story, like we literally launched like effectively a small cap value strategy, like the same month that Cathie Wood launched ARK. So like, if you think about that, like here I am, like, and I had been through the .com boom and bust. So I'm looking at her portfolio over here, which is a bunch of disruptive, innovative companies that aren't making any money, trading at crazy valuations. And here's our small cap value fund. I was like, we're going to blow the doors off and she'll be out of business in a year. And, well, we know what happened. I mean, we ended up closing our ETF down. We ran it for about 5 years. We ended up closing it down after COVID. And, she ended up, a lot of investors have lost money maybe with Cathie, but it's like, she obviously had built an incredible business when things were good, and it's still a decent business. So it's not like
she's built belief.
Yeah, exactly. And people that invest
even
with
though
her,
I would guess that her average investor has actually lost a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
I think that's true.
I haven't done the math on it, but your timing would have to be extraordinarily good to have made money with her over any long period.
Right. I'm pretty sure that you're right.
That's just the data. I'm not kicking Cathie Wood.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's just the data. It's just what the data shows.
Yeah.
So there was, so it was like this business, growing it, kind of going through some tough times with it, trying to do things that we thought were going to move the needle. Obviously the Canadian business was kind of a big sort of hit for us when it happened. And then, and then we sort of started to get behind and the podcast isn't a moneymaker, but it's certainly been good from a personal brand and just networking standpoint, like we've talked about. And I feel like, we've stayed pretty true to what the mission of that is. And there's some people like Perth that really look at that and say, that's great, Justin, you're here now with Life and Liberty, continue to do that. It only helps indirectly, hopefully grow the brand. But not all firms think that way, and that's okay. That's just how it is sometimes,
Yeah.
So
I now have 3 questions. There might actually be 1 question, but I have 3. Um, what triggered the start of excess returns, and how did you run across Matt and Jack?
Okay. So, well, Jack, I've been partners with for a while.
Okay. Got it.
And
Okay.
he's still running Validia Capital. So he's still
Okay.
actively, so we started excess returns. I went to a ETF conference. I think it's like Inside ETFs, the big one down in like Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah.
That's
So
Inside ETFs.
yeah, Inside. So I went down there and I was hanging out with Toby Carlisle. Do you guys know Toby?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he had started like this podcast, like Value After Hours. And obviously Meb Faber was kind of like one of the OGs in podcasting. And obviously Patrick O'Shaughnessy was having tons of success. And then we kind of saw Toby, and it was like, I just came back and I was like, Jack, we got to start a podcast. Like, I think and we decided to do video and audio. Like, I think we were early, like, I'm not saying like super early, but we were with like kind of investing podcasts. Most of them were just audio at that point. And so we decided to come out with audio and video. And then at first it was just Jack and I talking to each other about various articles we would write. And then I was like kind of interviewing him. He was sometimes interviewing me. And that was okay. But that was, it's always tough at the beginning when you're getting like 20 views and you're like, oh man, that took a lot of work. And like, we're not really getting traction. And
agreed, by the way, agreed.
Yeah. Well, you guys, it takes time. And then kind of like, I think what you guys are doing correctly out of the gate is getting guests, because get guests, have them share their story. And for us, we felt really lucky. Like we had, Toby and some of these guys were, pretty widely followed, like on Twitter, when that used to maybe matter a little bit more. So, Toby, the Alpha Architect guys, and, and then it just kind of has sort of just continued to build on. We've done a lot of podcasts, but the guest quality and the quality of the content is really good. And like, I like, and we get nice compliments on it, like from a lot of different people. From like, I went up to UConn to do a road race a few weekends ago. And there's this guy I know from undergrad, like he works at UConn, and like, I bump into him. So I haven't seen him for like 20 years. Pretty much. And I think we might be connected on LinkedIn. I don't know. Like, we're not actively in that, but he's like, I love your podcast. He's like, and that is so cool. Like when somebody just, and I know him, it's not like he's recognizing me, but that's very like rewarding to me, like hearing that someone is actually getting some value from it, Well,
so, what I think you guys do, especially well, and in certainly the top category of people that I can think of who have a podcast on quantitative finance, is, like you said, you have this trifecta of a great guest who is well studied and obviously is worth their merit in the field that they are talking on. And you combine that with hosts who ask great questions and make the podcast interesting and flow well. And the third piece of it that I think a lot of quantitative analytical finance podcasts might miss, that you guys do well, is you distill those concepts down to a level where mostly anyone can join in the conversation and feel intelligent. And I've heard other people say it as, you assume that the person listening knows nothing, and at the same time you assume that they're capable of learning anything. And you guys do that very well, where you match those two. You assume that the listener knows nothing relative to what you and the guest speaker are talking about on that podcast. So you're able to educate them, and at the same time, you're assuming that they have a limitless capability for learning these things that you are presenting to them. And I think that's just a very special quality that very
Thanks.
good podcasts can nail. And you do it in the area of quantitative, deep, maybe call it deep geek finance. And
Thanks, Jess.
so yeah, you guys have definitely nailed that in that category. So I would agree. What do you have out? Like, what's the carrot out in front of you? What's next as far as
well, I mean, it's all
building?
about, it's all, you know, I'm all in with Life and Liberty and Perth, and I mean, really hoping that we can, and again, it's not all, you can do really good, and the market gods can kind of act against you, and you never know. But I think like what she's created is really awesome. It has a lot of attractiveness to a lot of investors. And the other thing, it's been a pretty bad decade for emerging markets in general.
Mm-hmm.
You never, these trends can last longer, but I mean, this thing comes in cycles. So, maybe we'll get some tailwind, certainly from a valuation standpoint. EM looks cheaper than places like the US, but that's not always a good timing indicator. But it's just, building this with Perth, and she's given me a great opportunity, and it's just making sure that I'm delivering everything I can for her. And then, and we continue to focus, excess returns is I kind of just show up and do the interviews. I gotta give all the credit to like the growth of that, mostly to Jack. He's the one that's figuring out YouTube and sort of feeding that beast, if you will, because covers are important, titles are important, descriptive, timeline marks in the descriptions are all that kind of stuff, matters. And then, the other thing is we are talking about, it's sort of conceptual stage, although we have had conversations with a few publishers about a book idea. And so I think we have a good concept for a book. But have either of you written a book? Have you ever? Okay.
Not yet.
Books,
Not yet.
Books are a lot of work. Books are a lot of work.
That's just why I say not yet. I need my youngest.
I'll stick to my 3 to 7 page pieces on Substack for now.
There you go. Well, what you can do is like kind of our thing is we're trying to take one of the core questions we ask in the podcast and kind of wrap that up with some content. So it's kind of about strategically reusing what you already have, not coming up with all new stuff,
point.
Well,
I mean, if you look at Jim O'Shaughnessy's most recent book, it's just something he's been doing for years. Two Thoughts, right? The Two Thoughts thing.
Right.
It's just something he's been doing for years. And he's just packaged up all that content. And I mean, a good chunk of Morgan Housel's book was writing that he had put together for years and packaged it. So I don't know. So now maybe I might write a book.
When my youngest goes to college, I'm going to cry for a month. And not get out of bed because I'm like just going to be devastated. I know, with having that change of life. And then the next thing I'm going to do is write a book so that hopefully I can publish it by 50. So I'll be watching, as you guys pull this project forward. Cause that's, it's definitely on my bucket list.
And before we wind up here, we still haven't covered how you got to Perth and Life and Liberty.
That really comes from just being in that network around Perth and the good people that, I've developed relationships with. That includes the Alpha Architect and ETF Architect guys. Perth has been on our podcast a few times. People like Jess, Corey Hofstein, like guys that kind of are in that sort of circle to some extent that we've been together in this area for more than just like 2 years. It kind of goes back to, the mid, 2015, 16, 17. Like at that ETF conference I was telling you with Toby, Perth was there. So that's when I first met Perth. And I think she had just launched the ETF maybe at that point in time. And so,
Hey, Jess, I wonder if that was the same conference where she was crying on the beach and thinking she's just never
Yes,
going to make it.
I think it might have been.
What an unbelievable intersection of events.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's kind of, and it was good because I think we, Perth and I were able to work together a little bit before and kind of learn a little bit more about our styles. And I think that's always good when you can do that. Have a little bit of history there. And and then I guess the rest is history in terms of, the next stage of my career, which I'm really excited about. The other thing I just want to say is like, I've had, tons of like great support, like just in my life from my wife to my family to my wife's family, like just the things with Validia and the transition I was going through and all that, and the network of people that I was sort of calling on to get advice and just act as sounding boards and network and figure out what the next thing for me. So I feel really fortunate in that sense that, great people around me in a lot of ways. So,
well, I've said this before. I'll say it again. And even more so now that you've walked us through some of your story, it's with what I know about Perth. One of the reasons that she stands out to me in we'll call it the asset management space, the product side of the industry, is that she has an abundance mindset. And we've talked about this several times when we were talking, what would it take to grow to the next level?
mm-hmm.
Why do you want to grow to the next level? There's a lot of people on the ETF, mutual fund, asset management side of the industry. When I talk to them about those things, or when anyone talks, you can tell the reason that they want to grow is the money, like the money opportunity. And because there's money out there, why not go get it? And the certainly the thing that struck me differently about Perth when we talked about this was that she just believed so much in her idea,
mm-hmm.
that it was a good and right idea for people to be
right.
bought into, but not just with their dollars, with their hearts and with their minds, and to put their money where it could make a difference in the world. And then she believed on the flip side of that, the return side of that, was that it can and has shown that it is a, just from a, at least back look back standpoint, the track record, that it has worked. And so, of course, this investing podcast will say, past returns do not indicate any sort of future.
No need for a performance disclaimer. You're okay.
But that is just such a stark difference for her, is that she believes in building because she believes in the intrinsic value of what
right.
she is building. How cool is it that she has met someone who loves building and has over time been depositing into his toolbox all the things that he would need to come alongside her and help her with building this thing. And as I look into the future, what I see is something that makes this world better, not just something that puts dollars back into people's pockets. It's just like, I'm so excited for you. Excited for her, excited for this. I can't imagine another fund that I would want to see grow into the future with both investors and belief. And I just can't I can't wait. So I hope y'all write a book too. That's where I was headed with that. Like I hope y'all figure that out and are able to put down her story and your story and how that all came together. Because as Mark mentioned, like what a tremendous thought, or what a cool thought to think that you were both right there in that same place where Perth was making a huge decision about the future of this business that you're now partnered with her in and going to help her grow. So I love it.
And both of you not necessarily in the best spot you've ever been in your lives.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out what comes next. And,
right.
Now here we are. So it's it's very neat to observe.
Yeah, it is.
It's going to be fun to see where all this goes.
I agree.
Thank you guys.
Yeah,
very much appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks
Great
for
to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.